we're back with On the Record with Kevin and Tiffany on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, home of conservative talk radio, where we are giving it to you straight, no chaser, where we are the proud American descendants of the formerly enslaved, and our politics is B1, Black First. All right, Dr. Salas, I cut you off there. So what did you want to say there?
Well, I was just going to say, talking about the past, I like this very famous quote someone once said: "The past can never be quarantined from the present."
I like that.
Because the past informs the present, and the past informs the future. So when someone says, "Well, that was in the past," well, yeah, that doesn't take anything away from it, because you can't quarantine what happened back then to say it doesn't have an effect now. And to your question or your point about now, well, let's do that. Race norming is what's being used nowadays. It's like a so-called, I call it pseudoscience, way of trying to come up with. The National Football League has been using it. And they've said they will cease using this, but black players automatically are assumed under this statistical manipulation of race norming to have started off in a worse cognitive position, so that when they get a concussion, he must have already had a concussion to begin with because he's black.
That Negro was dumb to begin with. That's why his IQs dropped, right?
Yeah, you said it like from the hood, but that's right. But that's right. And nowadays that's called race norming, and the NFL has been accused of doing that. They're supposed to have stopped it, but a black player and white players are perceived differently based on some raw score statistical formula, in which they're trying to say, like you said, they came injured to the game in the first place.
He came up short a few IQ points to begin with on that.
Yeah,
that's the part they're trying to say.
So don't send him to the hospital right away. Where somebody else, it happens right away. So that's a good example of racism that came from the past that's still here in the 21st century.
You know what you said about, we say quarantine, you can't quarantine the past from the future. That's what you said.
You can't quarantine. Yeah.
You know who's trying to do that now, right? That's DeSantis and Abbott. They trying to take all the history books out, so they trying to quarantine the past from the present. They making an effort to do that.
Oh yeah, I mean,
where's the hammer so I can hit that nail right on the head?
But and that's oh yeah, and they are participating in. And see, I always tell people, right? It's that process. Right. Like, so for us, we see that process. And when you point that process out, right, and which is why I always tell people, when you are able to have the political juice, and by political juice, I mean, you're able to bring the votes in. That's how you change things like that, where you have people making horrible recommendations by calling, I think the phrase on slaves where they were transitioning, right, that slaves were transitioning. They were transitioning. They were transitional work. Transitional work. That is what they call. And you're sitting there, you're like, who in the hell came up with this idea, right? Let's call these things like they are, right? So, which is why I really like Professor Salas, right? When I read his books, I'm like, wow, he said it, right? And so we aren't to be so committed or so patriotic that we can't acknowledge the past, can't acknowledge reality, right? I always say this. I say, Black people, the American descendants of the formerly enslaved, we are the most patriotic individuals in America because we see the country for what it is, right? And we still love it. We don't deny the past. We go, hey, that happened. And we know it has an impact now. Right. And one of the things that I'm always concerned about as I get older is that people will lose the context, right, in which we're doing things. Why is it important that you can't discriminate on race, creed, color, et cetera, right? Because that's what was done in the past. Right. And then now that stuff is baked into the system. And when we identify those things, we have to begin to say, OK, let's unravel this and go get this corrected within the system.
Well, and And we've hit on the educational system, as Reggie pointed out, about them trying to deny. They don't want us to use this word slavery anymore. They don't want us to talk about that. They don't want us to talk about racism. They want us to act like white supremacy doesn't exist. They don't want us to even mention the fact that the Alamo heroes were slave owners. They want to deny all of this, like it never happened. It's not important. But by saying that, you are in effect teaching a falsehood. Yep. You are teaching a history. You're teaching something that's out of sync with the historical record. It's just totally factually untrue of the way history is taught. And we all grew up with Christopher Columbus discovered America. No, he didn't. We all grew up. We all grew up. And I mean, really, the primary source documents show that. It didn't happen that way. We all grew up with these, I call it racial fiction. We grew up with this racial fiction. And it's very hard for people to sometimes make the change or understand what happened to them. And sometimes it's difficult for people to understand that. You have to admit to yourself, well, I've been lied to a long time. And for some people, that's hard to do because it creates a feeling of you become uncomfortable that from a psychological point of view. But you have to do it. Otherwise, you're living a falsehood. You're living out something that's totally fictitious. And so that's what I think what we have to do. We have to keep teaching Black history. We have to keep teaching Mexican American history. We have to keep teaching Native American history. We have to keep teaching that because it was never taught. It was purposely avoided. Purposely avoided.
Yeah. And that's why I always use the word ADOS interchangeably with Black, right? Because I want to remember that we are from the American descendants of the formerly enslaved. That is our origin and tie into this country for most Black people, right? Who have been here, right? And I always say, I can go back, I got, 6 generations of Black people in America. So don't tell me that we're not America. Don't tell me I don't have a culture, right? When Black people influence everything. We influence cool. We are the definition of cool. Right now, who are people worldwide trying to be like? They're trying to be like this next generation of Black people, right? With the braids, the saggy pants, the slim pants. Now, I don't like that because I can't fit into them. I'm sorry, I just can't.
Koreans right now, Koreans dance better.
You're too old, Kevin.
Koreans dance better than Black people now with our own dance.
Yeah. And so we impact the culture, right? Which also how we are treated as how everyone else is treated. Historically, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, those were passed because of the freemen, right? Our descendants, right? Solomon Stanfield, right? I say that name because that's an ancestor of mine who was enslaved right outside of San Antonio in Gonzales. Those laws were created for them. But who were the first people to use the 14th Amendment, right? Right, naturalization, right? So the first people to use that was in California, right? A man of Asian descent, they wouldn't let back in the country. He used the 14th Amendment, right? So historically, everything that benefits us as the American descendants of the formerly enslaved, everyone who comes into this country reaps the benefit of that. And that's why I push hard. That's why we push hard. For us, our specialty is chronic kidney disease and rare kidney disease, because if we improve how we're treated and we improve how the education that we receive, everybody will reap the benefit of that. So. Right. I'm sorry, I just get really passionate about this subject, is that we are the definition of cool.
I saw that shirt. The definition of cool. I saw a shirt that said they want our rhythm, but not our blues.
Yeah, you know what? I was actually at a football game one time and heard this guy behind me say something like, hitting on your point, Reggie. I actually heard him say this. He said he was talking to his wife or somebody. White guy. He says, I sure love the way them black guys run that football, but I wouldn't want none of them coming to my house. Think about that. That's the schizophrenia of racism. I love their Black talent, but I hate them. Now you tell me how crazy. That's crazy. Absolutely insane.
That's insane right there. It's like, like I say, they want the rhythm, but not the blues. It's like they would prefer like when Olympic time comes. Oh man, the black man, they love us. Olympic time, track and field, they love us. They represent. Oh, we won 16 gold medals. Not of them be black.
Yeah.
After that, it's like, hey, like when Tommy Smith and John Carlos, man, did they caught hell for that. But they represented the country. They won the medals for the country, and they still, gave them hell. I don't understand that, man. They want our rhythm, but not our blues, man. They want to be like us and like the things that we bring to this country. So, just celebrate. Everybody should celebrate all the different cultures and the stuff that we bring, and it'll be a better place, man. We are stronger, than other countries because of the diversity that we have over here.
Yeah, and
don't use that word diversity. That'll make some people really mad.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's another crazy idea in the 21st century when we're talking about how things are still not. White supremacy has a long lifetime. Like I said, it changes, it morphs. It goes from overt slavery to semi-slavery to slavery by another name. Black folks aren't the N-word anymore. Then it went to colored, then it went to Negro, then it went to black, and then went to African American. Now back to black. So, but I understand that because people have been oppressed. They do have all people who have been oppressed have trouble with self-identification, and white folks don't get away from it either because they were something else before they were white. They got collapsed into a box too, even though they don't want to talk about that. They were Irish and German and Italian and French and so on and so forth. And when they come to this country, oh, sorry, y'all are supposed to forget about that. No, all you people are white. And this is how they create white supremacy. So they can create this box of Western Europeans that are supposed to hate everybody else. And when one white guy stands up and says, I ain't going to do that, they go after him like white on rice. He becomes an official black man, even if he's not.
Yeah. And
I was listening to I was looking at the old program, man, back in the day, like old classic stuff. I was Johnny Carson, and they had Don Rickles and Frank Sinatra on there. Don Rickles was like, yeah, I'm Jewish and you Italian, and he looked at Johnny Carson, and you, well, whatever. He's like, what are you? Yeah, so it's like, they can't really identify, with who they are either. It's like, where you come from. You didn't come from here. It's not your country.
Yeah, and what you see a lot.
Sinbad once said, he came to San Antonio, the comedian Sinbad, and he looked out in the audience. He said, well, how come in Texas they always talking about we need to stop all these immigrants from coming here? He said, hell, all y'all in this audience ain't from here. All y'all need to get out.
Yeah, and so one of the things that people from a historical context don't have failed to see, right, is that this is actually the last 60 years or so has been the second expression of us trying to include everyone in this great American experience. If you think post-slavery, right, after the war ended in 1865, and so from about 1865 up until about 1880, right, Black people were being included in the mainstream in terms of policy making. There was federal assistance to put down race violence against Black people. There was this inclusion where Black people were embracing the American. We had already embraced the American way, where we could be free to express and advance in America. And so if you historically go back and look, Black people were successful in all these genres in terms of academics, in terms of financial achievement, right? But that was all put down, after about 1880 when they began to instill Jim Crow. So people always point at, currently point at Tulsa, right, which was 1921, but they failed to mention all of the stuff that had previously happened before 1921 that made it the norm. When Black people are successful, you burn them down, right? And that's important to realize, that is that now we're in this new iteration of freedom where we're getting away from Jim Crow, aka apartheid in America, right? So we're away from that. And so now we have a greater degree of freedom and expression, right? Which is why I always remember that. So now we can be involved in the processes. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. Do you think it's a coincidence that Black people have a higher rate of kidney disease, higher rate of heart disease, higher rate of diabetes, higher rate of high blood pressure, higher rate of Black women in triple negative breast cancer? I mean, is that's just something in our DNA, or was that something planted? It's like, how did that? It's almost like racism is inside of diseases.
Do you want to reply to that?
So how is that? How is that? Did that just happen?
It's not DNA. It's environmental.
Yep.
And if you look at Black neighborhoods, like in San Antonio, was always a really ritzy kind of neighborhood called Willow Wood, and people moved there, some nice houses and everything back in the day. But what they didn't know is built on top of a dump, on top of a land refuge dump, and so people get cancer from that. Sometimes Black neighborhoods are close to railroad tracks, or they're built on top of dumps where they were dumping trash, toxic material, and so this kind of stuff is going on all the time. And in addition, I like what Malcolm X once said too about in the Black communities, we get the worst kind of food. You don't have the really fresh vegetables in the Black communities like you have in other parts of town. There seems to be a vegetable desert to some degree, or if there is vegetables, they're not as good, they're not as well grown as in other parts of the city. I think it's mostly environmental that we suffer from these diseases. And then, oh my God, and then of course it's habit. Of course, what were slaves fed? The worst parts of the hog, right? Pig feet, right? The worst parts of the animal, yeah, and the parts that are less nutritious, right? And so we grow up doing that. With some guys barbecue every day of the week, inhaling that smoke from the barbecue pit, yeah. And then how long and how often did they program Blacks to smoke cigarettes? You know, be cool. In our time frame, I think it was about our time frame. Cool, right? All Black folks were smoking cools.
That's right. That's right.
And it was killing you. Even the cigarette industry had played a role in producing cancer, lung cancer, and other forms of cancer. And so people that are poor, people that are impoverished, as well as people who are middle class, are the victims of this kind of environmental injustice. And it's based on racism.
Yeah. And I always think that we have to arise for ourselves and educate ourselves about these things so we can make better choices. And so that's the thing there. And you've been listening to On the Record with Kevin and Tiffany on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, home of conservative talk radio.